welcome to WaterBear Fresh Ideas. I am your host, Toby Moore, and tonight we are going to be having some amazing and exciting talks from WaterBear students sharing their fresh ideas with you. So WaterBear Fresh Ideas is an opportunity for students of WaterBear to share exciting, new and world-changing ideas and concepts that have the potential to change the shape of the music industry forever. So we have three fantastic speakers joining us today. We have Jason, we have Alexia, and we have Zoe Beth, all sharing a completely new and interesting take on their chosen topic and area of the music industry. We're going to be exploring topics from mental health through to sustainability and fast fashion, all the way through to how do we change the way that music is streamed and shared online. Very exciting, very challenging. We are going to be doing a series, well, the format for today is that each speaker will give a 5 to 10 minute talk. I will then grill that speaker for answers to questions that we all need to know, the details and the quandaries that we have that will really bring their idea to life and make it real. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Jason Rungapadiachy. I hope I got your rather long surname correct. Jason, fantastic. Jason is both a professional musician and then also has a long career as a mental health nurse as well. His talk will be presenting an idea to bring those two experiences and passions together in order to help us create more awareness around mental health through the music we create. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Jason to our digital stage. Jason, welcome. Are you there?
I am here.
Fantastic. Good to see you, buddy. Thank you so much for choosing to be a part of WaterBear Fresh Ideas. I am delighted to see you here and very excited to hear more about the idea that you want to share with us. Jason, the floor is yours. Share your fresh idea.
Thank you very much. Thanks for giving me some time to waffle on at you for a bit. So 2 years ago, I took a huge personal decision to change my career. One of those moments where you start to hover around the edge of being middle-aged, and I couldn't afford a sports car. So I thought to myself, well, I want to do something, I want to follow my dream. And since the late 90s, I've been working as in the NHS in mental health. I've had a variety of different roles, working with people suffering from all sorts of different mental health problems, with young people, with adults, people who've had concurrent drug and alcohol problems, and it was my life, a good 20-year career, and it's one of those things that it's a very difficult job. It's a very impassioned job. You meet people going through the rawest, most kind of horrible times of their lives, and you hopefully get them to a point where they're not there anymore. So a very worthwhile career, but I figured I'd want to sort of pursue my own personal kind of needs, and I've been a musician since I was a kid. I've always done it. I've been working as on the side, a bit like kind of a musical Batman. So by night I'm flying around doing session work, function gigs, things like that. So what really kind of kicked off this sort of change is I commenced a master's at WaterBear, and I figured if I was going to sort of develop myself as an artist, as an independent artist, as a songwriter, it would be an awful waste to not incorporate 20 years worth of experience, of knowledge, of passion, of pain and joy and everything else, and make it part of my thing. So I looked into that, and as part of my kind of dissertation, I've been conducting a literature review and doing some research, and musicians and mental health have been hand in hand for decades. Either on their own terms or not, as most occasions it would seem to be, in the case of people like Kurt Cobain, for example, and many artists such as like Mariah Carey has recently been very kind of famous as one of the kind of highest profile ones of talking about her experiences of bipolar disorder, and how frightened she was about talking about it, and how she feared that people's opinions of her would change when she did, or she might not get the gigs she wanted, or her profile might kind of be damaged by that. And then there are artists who are at the ground level with modest audiences, also talking about their experiences, but in their cases they're not talking to billions of listeners. They're talking to a few hundred maybe, and also expressing the same concerns. You know, if I want to talk about mental health, if I want to try and reduce stigma and help reduce isolation and make people feel more validated for, you know, for their own feelings, knowing that there's people out there who share what they're going through, or as a catharsis to help people express themselves. It's challenging, and it's a very sort of and sometimes, you know, sometimes risky thing to do. I reached out to a beatboxer called SK Shlomo, who some of you might know. Incredibly gifted man, and he built a very, very good reputation from being an incredible live looper and beatboxer. He started talking about his own experiences and immediately got a barrage of online abuse, and lost loads and loads of Twitter followers in the process. And it was a very challenging thing for him to do. But more and more musicians are sort of building communities around talking about mental health, creating that discourse, allowing people a safe place to go and share their ideas and share their experiences, just to know that they're not alone and they're not the only people out there. And that's one of the most powerful interventions I ever came across when I was in the profession, so to speak, was just that conversation where two people may meet and say, oh, my son does this, and somebody else says, oh gosh, my daughter does that too. And suddenly that little connectivity is so powerful. The fact that musicians are going out there and being brave enough to try and provide that for people is massive. I'm thinking to there was a band called Frightened Rabbit. Their singer, Scott Hutchinson, took his own life at the age of 36. And they've created an entire network based around telling stories, sharing, kind of people sharing their experiences and coming together. But also, they've built upon that, and they've linked into charities now, and they have professionals involved and resources that people can go to, share their story, and access help at the same time. I guess that's at the extreme end of where somebody's set up a really strong network, but most of us don't necessarily have the means or the capability to do that. So we're going in there blind. We're opening these conversations and then having to deal with the consequences of what that might bring to either the people that are talking to us, and whether it makes them feel worse or better, or whether they're raising issues that are really difficult, like suicide and self-harm, and then how that affects us having to listen to it and be relatively powerless in terms of being able to help people. I think there are many barriers to musicians such as us taking on the mental health message and challenging stigma. I do believe the more of us doing it, the better. I think stigma is being improved over the years, but the fact is it's still there, and there's been decades of campaigns, all sorts of high profile names lending themselves to the conversation, and it still isn't improving for many people who suffer from mental health problems. So I guess, you know, part of my idea really is, at first I wanted to think about how I could incorporate delivering the mental health message, the awareness message, the anti-stigma, helping people feel more connected, less alone. And then I realized perhaps there's another barrier in there, which is, you know, how can I not just do that myself, but encourage others and bring other people with me? Maybe we need to make musicians feel safer, more equipped, more in a position to be able to do this, because they have protection in place to help them when things get hot and when things get difficult. And I remember going back to my career, you know, when we went to see patients and we had difficult situations, we'd go back to the office and we'd talk to fellow professionals, or we'd see what we call a clinical supervisor, who would see us regularly and help us work through those difficult scenarios, difficult situations, to help us go home and not kind of lose sleep. Well, you'd always lose sleep, but to help keep that damage to a minimum. And perhaps there's some scope out there for something like that, a network of musicians, all of whom are passionate about delivering the mental health message, but can also support each other, or I can offer some support to them. In many ways, a lot of the negative consequences of opening this conversation are inevitable, because mental health and mental illness is a very, very, you know, complex and very difficult subject. However, there are many barriers that we could overcome, and I believe that, you know, the more people involved in this and invested in it could come together and you know, create a community of mutual support. So really, that's kind of what I'm asking at this point. Certainly from the point at my current point in my dissertation, is I'm kind of asking, you know, perhaps there are no answers to kind of reducing the risks and making it easier for people. But can we reduce the reasons to not do it? Can we reduce people's excuses to not open this conversation enough to make more and more individuals, whether they be kind of grassroots, low-key artists, or whether they be people at the very top with millions of people in their followership? So basically that's kind of where my thinking's at the moment. But yeah, thank you very much for hearing my ideas.
Awesome, Jason. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that idea with us and for sharing your experiences in your work as well, and bringing those two things so neatly and nicely together. I've got a couple of questions that I want to dive in and just sort of start to unpick this with you a little bit. One of the things that you talked about it just in your closing comments as well, is kind of really the ultimate goal, or at least the sort of like initial goal for you here is to kind of make it easier for musicians to open up, or to de-risk that process. And the example that you gave of the beatboxer who lost a lot of social media followers overnight, you know, for opening up. What do you think are the first few steps towards creating a safer space, de-risking that act?
I think often it's that the harm will happen. There will always be somebody on the internet who will say something harmful, hurtful, very deeply personal, you know, very critical, because that's the nature of stigma. That's what we have now. There's still, in the general, you know, discourse and general conversation, we still refer to terms that are kind of bandied around to describe people who are struggling with their mental health. We use wacko, psycho, nut job. In fact, most of the things that Donald Trump used to tweet about, frankly, it's pretty much his Twitter feed was a perfect example of how alienating it must be, you know, to start to say, well, actually, I suffer from this, and then all these associated things. So the harm is always going to be there. It's about offsetting that. And I think when I spoke to Shlomo and asked him how he got through it, and he said that he had a community of those people who did stick around, and they came together in a huge way and rallied round.
I guess one of the things that I've noticed over the years of this is that it usually takes something extremely negative to happen in order to energize some change. Like the earliest memory I think I have of coming across this was like, not the earliest memory, but like the most significant memory I've got is when the drummer of Feeder took his life, and that was, you know, because I think that was a band that really resonated with me at that time, and so on. And but that's a terribly negative thing. But it took something like that to create an awareness and a change in my thinking, and to create a conversation circle of friends. Do you think there are changes that can happen that can be prompted by more positive experiences, rather than waiting for you know, more musicians to commit suicide in order to create change?
I think the difficulty is there are endless positive examples out there. People are making huge steps every day, but they're not the things that get talked about. They don't get noticed. They're not sensational enough. You know, somebody who's not been able to leave the house in 6 weeks because of anxiety takes a step out and they manage to post a letter. That's massive, but that's not going to make the papers. That's not going to get out there. And this is why I think we need spaces where stories are told, and it isn't just about stories of kind of how low people are, but also I managed to do this today. I managed to do this today, and I've come across communities. I've observed communities where that happens, where somebody messages a WhatsApp group or gets involved in a Discord, and they say, "Oh, I managed to go to the shop today," or "I spoke to my father today, and I've not spoken to him in 20 years." You know, and people are straight in there saying, "Well done, that's amazing. Oh, you've inspired me. Now I'm gonna make a call, or I'm gonna get this done." I think we need to make that more commonplace. We need to give people a space where that happens more often, where there's more recognition of the positives, because I think they're harder to recognize because they're just not out there.
And that does tend to happen more in online communities versus online, you know, social media, I guess, isn't it? So maybe there's something about drawing attention towards what's happening in communities rather than what's happening on social media, I guess.
Yeah.
One more thing I'd like to ask you. I mean, it comes back into this sort of like this whole toolkit of things that need to happen, and you made a very specific reference to having like a sort of clinical supervisor or something like that. which which at this particular time, might feel more at home in kind of like a healthcare or a charitable setting or something like that. What do you think that might look like if you were to translate that into today's music industry? So, what does is there a different kind of language or a different approach or something that makes something like, something like clinical supervision, for example, makes that feel more accessible and more acceptable as a service or something that we do?
I think, that's a really good question. And I think that there's so many different steps on the ladder with clinical supervision, a formal process of helping people debrief and process what they're going through in a professional and safe environment, it's a counseling technique in and of itself. That's kind of the gold standard, I guess. But before that, if we are able to, say, create a network of musicians who are all aware of each other's aims and ambitions in terms of opening these conversations, and we're also aware that they're doing it, it's that idea that, just knowing that somebody knows that you're putting yourself in danger or putting yourself at risk and you might need someone to talk to later that evening. Simple buddy systems where people could pair up, or small groups of musicians could be part of a team, and somebody could just put a little message out saying, "Oh, one of my fans' message today said that their brother took his own life, and it's affected me, and I feel really bad, and I wish I could have done more." And and it's that group of people to then go, "Oh, we're here. Let's talk about it." But it might be even just simpler things. Just having to hear people's negative stories a lot will leave a negative feeling, and just the ability to know that somebody also is going through that, because again, there's that validation, but that connectivity, but also, just that it's like the same as a group of mental health nurses or a group of psychiatrists or counsellors may have a little coffee in the staff room between patients. Oh, I've had a terrible one. That was really tough. That really took it out of me. Oh, let's have a cup of tea and a biscuit. It's that. It's got to be a constant. It's got to be a regular. It's got to be on tap. It's got, it can't be just I've got to wait 2 weeks before I talk to my supervisor. It needs to be an ongoing and ever-present thing. It's a culture.
Yeah. Really, really, really interesting, Jason. Last question. What are you going to do? What's your next step to making this happen?
Really interesting one, that, because I think I've only recently come to the sort of conclusion that I think that's the sort of direction I want to look at. I was looking at it in a much more micro sense, but I think if you're going to try and push something forward, try and drag people with you. I think I want to start conversations with other people that I know are hoping to do this. I want to start to gather a bit of a posse, gather a bit of a team, and start to gain a little bit of information about what people's worries and fears are, and maybe look to putting something together. But I think a little bit of investigation, a little bit of groundwork. Let's work out what people's biggest fears are before we start to address them. And yeah, there's so many different things you can do with this. It's a really positive thing, because I'm no longer looking at this as a barrier or as an obstacle. Oh heck, talking about mental health is going to be really tough. I'm thinking, well, it might be, yeah, but look at the possibilities now, and
Right.
suddenly all these doors are opening. So I don't have a firm answer to that question.
Yes, but you have a beautifully positive mindset about it. And I think that's really, really important at this stage as well. Jason, thank you so much for sharing. That was a fantastic talk, and a beautiful insight into something that is very challenging and very difficult. And I really admire you for putting together something that could really, really change the shape of the way that mental health is discussed in music. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful for you joining us today.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks ever so much.
You're